It is so cold out today that I can't even think straight. So I'm trying super hard uh, to warm up here. My name is Stacey Goldring, and this is Chapter Endnotes Book Club. Today we're going to discuss. See, my teeth are frozen together. The Awakening, The Awakening by. You get it in there. Let's go like this. There you go. The Awakening by Kate Chopin. I'm trying to pronounce it as it's supposed to be pronounced, but I probably messed it up. And here's another copy I have from 150 years ago. So this is my third time reading this book. It's different every time. I think as we get older and we revisit books, we have different baggage that we're schlepping onto every page. And in the case of an awakening, it's no different. Here's what we're going to try to tackle in our time together. And please do all the YouTube things. Subscribe, ring the notification bell, tell all your friends, everyone about Kate Chopin, The Awakening, and Chapter Endnotes Book Club. I super appreciate it. I'm going to do a brief introduction about the book. Warning, there are a lot of spoilers here. So if you have not yet read the book, may want to press pause and quickly get that done because it's not very long. This actually is a collection of short stories. This is just The Awakening itself. And then come on back and we're going to go through this and you're going to explore the awakening like you're going to become very awakened. So I have some questions that I'd like to pose to you. I'd love to see what your answers are below. Then I'm going to present this book to you as an entire context of beginning with the 1880s and the women's movement in America, kind of for the backdrop. Then we'll weave in a personal timeline of Kate Chopin, enter her writing career, and then the world's reaction, well, I should say, first of all, the United States reaction to the awakening, then what happened after Kate Chopin passed, and the rebirth, the awakening 2.0, or as the introduction in this particular Penguin edition calls it, I believe it's the second coming of Aphrodite, which is super cool. All right, so we're going to go ahead and, as Lady Seward would say, we're going to plunge right in. Like I said, this is a spoiler alert. How do you interpret the end of this book? Because the first two times I've read it, I was convinced it was a suicide. And the first time I read it, I thought, okay, this is tragic. The second time I read it, I was so tired of our main character, Edna Pointelier. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm just going to call her Edna P. That I was like, good riddance. I'm so done with you. And then this time I read it and I was like, wait a minute. What just happened? Did she really take her life? Did she really drown? Because technically, I'm not sure. I have several book clubs this week in person, and I'm very eager to get everyone else's advice, but I'd love to hear what you think. So that is the first big question that I have. The book was received with great contempt and disgust when it was published in 1899. And here is what our amazing author, Kate Chopin, had to say about that. She said, I never dreamt of Mrs. Pointelier, and please tell me, I already know I'm pronouncing it wrong. So Mrs. P, making such a mess of things and working out her own damnation as she did. If I had the slightest intimation of such a thing, I would have had excluded her from the company. But when I found out what she was up to, the play was half over, and then it was too late. Quite cheeky. So very briefly, the novel follows Edna P., a Southern woman living in New Orleans during the 20th century. We often refer to this period for those of wealth as the Gilded Age. It certainly wasn't for everyone. And this is a woman who is struggling with her identity, who she is in society as a woman, as a wife, as a mother. And it both illustrates the role of women in society at that time, particularly the Creole society, and also the the suppression that women like Edna P. felt. And remember, we've got an ambient rumblings of the women's movement happening as early as in the early 1850s, early part of the 19th century. All right, so a lot about the question of the suicide and what it means. Is it liberation? Is it hopelessness? Literary debates have raged and they will continue to rage on. And that's what I love about literature. So I want you to just ponder this statement by a scholar that I found. Though Edna's apparent suicide at the end of the novel is a source of contention, it can be read as Edna's final commitment to living an active, autonomous life rather than returning to her stifled, introspective, pre-awakening existence. So this is a battle of the flesh versus the spirit. All right. So basically what happens in this book very quickly, again, is Edna's hanging out on Grand Isle over the summer, just think super hot, not like it is here today. She meets and falls in love with a young man. They realize their love cannot go anywhere in this restricted society. So the young man, Robert, goes to Mexico. She returns to New Orleans once summer is over and just is like, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to every Tuesday open my house for everyone to come over and have a chat. I love my kids, but like I'm not giving my life I'm not devoted to them. I want to paint. I want to basically I want to move out. And that's exactly what she does. She like buys a house or rents a house, depending on your interpretation and the person reviewing the book, around the corner, begins to outfit it. Meanwhile, her husband's like, I think she's mentally insane, and consults with the doctor, who is one of the only heroes in the story. And Edna takes up with her own group of friends, kind of a, you know, they're like not the upper class, whatever. And Mr. P. Leonce thinks, you know what will make her happy? We're going to redecorate. So he begins redecorating the house. It doesn't work for her. Her lovebird, Robert, whatever, reappears from Mexico. They happen to run into each other, consummate their love, but ultimately, he's not willing to break the social norms to have a future with her. Edna basically gives up, returns to Grand Isle, strips, walks out into the Gulf, where we decide or not that she drowns, or does she carry on? We don't know, because there is a mythical element to this story. There is a dreamy element to the writing, which makes us wonder. So that's that in the nutshell. All right. I'm going to go ahead and now bring in the context for writing The Awakening, and also weave in the life of Kate Chopin. So bear with me. So the 1880s is a time when in America there is a change in the women's status. In 1848, women gathered in New York to begin addressing issues of equality. A first convention of women set the groundwork for the women's rights movement. Women organized, became educated about social and political issues, etc., but realized that women did not gain the right to vote till 1920 in America. Edna's actions in The Awakening reflect the times and the emotions felt by many women who sought something that was unheard of, and that is personal freedom. In 1850, Catherine O'Flaherty was born in St. Louis. She's the second child of Thomas O'Flaherty of County Galway in Ireland and Eliza Ferris of St. Louis. Kate was the third of five, but her sisters died in infancy, and her half-brothers from her father's first marriage died in their early 20s. She was raised Roman Catholic in the French and Irish traditions, an avid reader, fairy tales, poetry, religious allegories, novels, etc. The family on her mother's side, like I said, was French, so she grew up speaking both French and English. So it was a bilingual and bicultural home. She feeling at home in different communities with different values and the influence of French life and French literature on her thinking can be seen throughout all of her fiction. At the age of 5, she went to St. Louis Academy of the Sacred Heart and spent a year at the Academy of the Visitation. She went there with a very good friend, Kitty, and also she learned at this time to become independent. Here's a little kid learning how to handle her own money and make her own decisions. She had a mentor who was a gifted writer named Mary O'Meara, and she taught and guided Kate to write regularly, judge herself critically, and to conduct herself valiantly. We all need mentors in our lives, and this is one of her many female mentors, and this is important. She was also mentored by her mother and her grandmother. Her great-grandmother tutored her at home, teaching her French, music, history, gossip. Isn't that interesting? And a need to look onto life without fear. So without fear is incredibly important. And this is how Kate plunges into life and her writing. She formed deep bonds with these family members and also the sisters who taught her at school. So much of the fiction she wrote as an adult draws on this nurturing. But this is also a young girl who was faced with a lot of trauma. Why? It's the 1850s in America, and we know what's coming in 1861. Her father was killed in 1855 in a railroad accident. She was brought up brought and she lived with her grandmother and great-grandmother. So she's there with 3 generations of women who were widowed and never remarried. She came from a slaveholding family in a city that was a major center for the slave trade. St. Louis is right there on the Mississippi. And there was constant fighting in St. Louis over the idea of succession. In 61, the Civil War came to St. Louis 9 days after her first communion at age 11. She and everyone she knew lived in constant terror. And at times she was confined to home because of the fighting going on in the street. Obviously, learning to be self-sufficient at a young age was the key to survival. In 63, her great-grandmother, who she loved dearly, passes, and she spends the rest of the Civil War in St. Louis for another year, where the residents supported both the Union and the Confederacy. Her half-brother enlisted in the Confederate Army. He was captured by Union forces and dies of typhoid. After the war ended, her friend, Kitty, and her family were banished from St. Louis for supporting the Confederacy. This is also a strong period of activism among women in St. Louis. There were many outspoken suffragists, not suffragists, suffragists. These are not Rockettes. These are women on a mission. Other women begin to question the very path of motherhood and marriage. And Susan B. Anthony is traveling at this time, talking about equal rights for women. From 1867 to 1870, Kate kept a commonplace book in which she recorded diary entries and copied passages of essays and poems, etc., that interested her. And in 1869, she wrote a little sketch called Emancipation. That sounded like my Michigan accent. Michigan, Ohio accent just sunk in. Emancipation. Emancipation, a life fable. And by the way, Chopin is always pronounced in the French way. In English, it would be something like Chopin, even though it's Chopin. At 18 years old, she was considered in her community to be an Irish beauty. Her friend Kitty later said of her, she had a droll gift of mimicry and a passion for music. She meets her husband, Oscar, at the age of 19 I think it's pronounced Nacogdoches, parish in Louisiana at a social event. And Oscar's family was French. And during the war, the Civil War, his family lived in Europe. And she wrote in her diary, I'm going to be married to the right man. It does not seem strange as I had thought it would. I feel perfectly calm, perfectly collected, and how surprised everyone was, for I had kept it so secret. So, like she writes in her diary, in 1870, they wed and they take the grand tour, not only of Europe, but also they go to Cincy, Philly, and New York, and then they go and travel throughout Europe. They settle in New Orleans during Reconstruction, and Oscar works as a cotton factor, dealing with cotton and commodities. The city was a mess economically and had racial troubles. Some things never end. And Oscar joined the notorious White League, a Democratic group that in 1874 had a violent confrontation with Republican radicals, causing President Grant to send federal troops into the city. Now, of course, there are also positive in New Orleans. I love New Orleans. The first is the music, also theater, horse races, and of course, Mardi Gras, all of which feature in her writing. In 1872, it is said she may have even met Edgar Degas, who lived in New Orleans around the same time she did, and they probably would have traveled in the same circles. Let's see. Like other wealthy families in the city, and like we see in The Awakening, the Chopins would go by boat to vacation in Grand Isle, a Creole resort in the Gulf of Mexico. And this is where the opening and closing scenes in The Awakening take place. From 1871 to 1879, she gives birth to 5 sons and 1 daughter, and one is named Frederick, very much like the composer, but they are not related. In 1879, Oscar's cotton business fails, and the Chopins move away to Cloiterville. I know I'm botching that, a small French village in the same parish in northwestern Louisiana, and they manage several plantations and a general store, become very active in the community. So she's doing all the right things you would expect of a young woman growing up in the South of means. She became immersed in the local Creole culture and used a lot of her experiences in her future writing. Her husband also buys, well, but really her husband, because women can't own things, also buys a general store. But in 1882, 3 years later, he dies of malaria. So at 32 years old, Kate is saddled with the there it is again, saddled with the responsibility of raising 6 children. She's 42 grand in debt. So in 2024, that's today, she would have been in debt to the tune of $1.2.7 million. P.S. She never remarries. The eminent scholar on Kate Chopin, Emily Toth, noted that, quote, for a while, the widow Kate ran Oscar's business and flirted outrageously with local men, unquote. In 1883 and 1884, Toth goes on to say that she may have had an affair or had an affair with a local planter and farmer. Now, I'm not being a yenta, I'm not gossiping, but you can see where the old adage, write about what you know, comes into play because, of course, Edna P. falls in love with Robert LeBrun, Robert L., in our book, The Awakening. She sells the business and moves back to St. Louis to be with her family, P.S. better schools, and she feels a better cultural life for her. Her mother dies the following year, and the home where she lived is still there today. Enter her writing. Okay, you can imagine that kind of life she's lived. You know, she's lost people dear to her. She suffered through the Civil War. Her husband passes away. She's got a lot of debt. She needs to start over. Kate has depression. A friend, remember I mentioned a doctor being a hero in the book? Well, here's a real life hero in Kate's life, and we see that reflected in the book by a doctor who says that he will actually listen to Edna when she's feeling kind of down. This particular doctor, Dr. Frederick Kolbeneyer, is her obstetrician and family friend. And when he sees her down, he says, "You know what? Why don't you write?" He suggests it could be therapeutic, focus her energy, and be a source of income. Now, when I'm not doing this, just PS timeout, I lead writing workshops, particularly for children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. And I can tell you that writing is a wonderful way to work through your feelings, your thoughts, and sort your identity. So I firmly believe that her doctor gave her a wonderful, healthy prescription. Our author was influenced, and I'm also going to botch this name because I've not yet read this author, but I would like to. I a little bit started one of his books, but I'm not far enough into it to have much to say about it. Guy de Maupassant and other writers, French and American, and she begins to follow the doctor's orders, and she begins writing. One of her stories in 89 appears in the St. Louis Dispatch, and by 1890, her first novel, At Fault, is published. And get this, I'm just going to give tell you a little bit what it's about. It's about a 30-ish Catholic widow who is in love with a divorced man. And like Edna in The Awakening, Therese struggles to reconcile her outward existence with her inward life. And you know what? We all struggle with this. There are thoughts on the inside versus what's expected in society. It's only human, but this is seen through the perspective of these people in these circumstances. She cannot, as a practicing Catholic, accept the idea of divorce, yet can't rid herself of the man she loves. This book is said to offer a compelling glimpse into what Kate Chopin was thinking when she began writing her writing career. So this is already fresh on her mind. She completes a second novel to have been called Young Dr. Ghosts and Theo, but she could not find a publisher, and it is said she later destroyed the manuscript. She then becomes active in St. Louis literary and cultural circles, discussing works of many writers. So she has her own kind of book club, just like us. And they discuss a lot of writers I don't know about yet. Also, Emile Zola, who I would love to read, and Georges Sand. She later called her daughter Leila, apparently after the title of Sand's 1833 novel. It may be Layla. It's Layla because of that thing. Okay. Her early works, like I said, are mentioned above. And by the 1890s, we are now looking at an author who forged a successful writing career, contributing short stories and articles to local publications and literary journals. But the 1890s there's this tension as we approach, I think it's called the fin de siècle, the end of the century. And we have this constant tension between the old and the new. And we have new terms like new women making their way into St. Louis. And the best way to describe new women today would probably be feminists. These were single women who wanted or were doctors, lawyers, journalists, etc. And also, let's add the fact that we have Darwin, who is talking about the theory of evolution and all these other scientific discoveries happening, which you would think are opening all kinds of doors to a grander way of looking at the world. People begin to question things, and they also question mortality. Another ambient layer to add as all this is going on, I love context, is we have the Industrial Revolution happening. So the world is changing. And as mentioned earlier, the women's suffragist movement is making its way forward. and P.S. According to law at the time, a married woman's property belongs to her husband. I just want to give you an idea of, these aren't kvetchy women or whinging women. These are women who want autonomy. Their property belonged to her husband, even if she had inherited the land before they wed. If she later divorced, the land still would legally be his. And I think when we read Middlemarch, we did not read Middlemarch in this group, but we read it in my literature group, which you can also look up on my YouTube channel. We talk about Dorothea Brooke and about George Eliot. This I think is called premoniture. I know I'm punching that up, but in 1832, when we have these reform movements where we want, where women want to actually be considered full-fledged citizens that have rights. This is hard fought recent history, and we have to realize as we read these books that we are just one breath away from stepping back into these roles. Okay, I need to stop. Let's continue because that could last 150 years. All right, now. So what else is happening in the 1890s for Kate? She has an active social life. She's also keeping accurate records of what she wrote, which magazines she submits to, etc. And she also starts writing for magazines, and she's praised, and this happens a lot, at least with female authors in America. They're praised for their capturing the local color, or they're considered really good regional writers. A lot of, they're kept in a certain cage. They can't just be great American writers like a lot of male writers. It's always there. It just seems like they're relegated to a geographical area or just a certain type of style. Eventually, obviously, this changes. So she continues writing. I'll just give you a name of a few other articles or short stories. A Point of Issue, A No Account Creole. She's also writing children's stories. Beyond the Bayou. She's writing for Harper's Young People. All kinds of things. In 1892, she writes a book, a short story called Desiree's Baby, which is very interesting because it deals with interracial relationships and communities of Creoles of color in Louisiana. And the concept of, I believe it's called placage, where formal arrangements between white men and free women of color or enslaved women make up for this kind of common law marriage. Persons who were visibly European American could be threatened by revelations if they have any type of African ancestry, and this fear plays a part in the story of Desiree's Baby through the character of Armand. So he tries to deny his identity, etc., etc. And I believe that Mark Twain wrote a good short story about this too that come to mind. I don't know if it's Pudd'nhead Wilson and the Extraordinary Twins. I'll have to go back. But anyway, very interesting. And of course, we have the classic Nella Larsen's Passing, which also deals with identity, how you look, etc. Fabulous, fabulous books. Okay, so she's Desiree's Baby is an important short story if we're looking at the arc in her writing career. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. But she's also writing a lot of stories, and she's traveling to New York and Boston, etc. She publishes in Vogue. But in 1894, a major work of hers also is printed called Bayou Folk. It's also a collection of 23 stories. It's published by Houghton Mifflin. Great success. Again, capturing life in northern Louisiana with such themes as prejudice, interracial relationships. And this was not common at the time. She is pressing the envelope. Okay, and she gets reviews in the New York Times and the Atlantic, etc. And again, she's being praised for her use of local dialects. And here is an essay that was published in Critic that offers insight to what she thinks about writers and writing. Among these people are to be found an earnestness in the acquirement and dissemination of book learning, a clinging to the past and conventional standards, an almost Creolean sensitiveness to criticism, and a singular ignorance of or disregard for value in its highest form. So Creole society to her was very, very restricting. And she's saying that as she's getting more into the literary world, this is a bunch of stuffed shirts. And she is not satisfied. She continues. There is a very, very big world lying not wholly in northern Indiana, nor does it lie at the antipodes either. It is human existence in its subtle, complex, true meaning, stripped of the veil with which ethical and conventional standards have draped it. She's pushing the envelope here. She's saying, what's going on underneath, and why aren't we talking about that? Because that is super duper important. She also published in St. Louis Life a review of Lords by the French writer Émile Zola. She didn't like the book, but the way she begins this review is illuminating. So I'm trying to capture Kate's voice for you, and I'm trying to set the stage. We're going to get to the awakening, but I want to set the stage for you. I once heard a devotee of Impressionism, Monet and all, admit in looking at a picture by Monet that while he himself had never seen in nature the particular yellows and reds therein depicted, he was convinced that Monet had painted them because he saw them and because they were true. With something of a kindred spirit in the sincerity of Monsieur Zola's work, I am yet not at all times ready to admit its truth, which is only equivalent to saying that our points of view differ, that truth rests upon a shifting basis and is apt to be kaleidoscopic. Those words are just so delicious to me that I just want to smile. Okay. She says human existence in its subtle, complex, true meaning, stripped of the veil with which ethical and conventional standards have draped it. So again, I've just repeated what I said upon the last page, and I apologize for that. But she says, again, truth rests upon a shifting basis and is apt to be kaleidoscopic. Let's remember this as we think about the awakening and how Edna's view of life, her true interpretation of life shifts. Think about Monet's painting as it evolves as he releases the bonds of traditional painting and moves to his impressionistic style. So just like Monet, Van Gogh, all these great artists leave the traditionalist behind. Kate is saying, well, I want to do that too. And that's exactly what her work does. She continues and continues to publish Lilacs, Her Letters, The Story of an Hour, A Respectable Woman, which appeared in Vogue, Anthony's Fedora, A Pair of Silk Stockings, and we get to 1897, A Night in Acadie, another major work. In 87, in 87, it is published by Wayne Williams and is praised by critics, quote, a string of little jewels. A modern critic considers it one of America's great 19th century book of short stories, because it's always short stories. Okay. And her grandmother's name, by the way, was Anthony's. And she also dies in 1897. And this is the year she begins to work on awakening. So she finishes Awakening in 1889. That's so funny. I wrote 1989, 1889. And she also writes another very important short story called The Storm. But because of its sexual content, it is not sent out to publishers and is not published until either 1969 or 1991. Don't hold me to either one of those because, full disclosure, I hate numbers. Okay, so Herbert S. Stone publishes The Awakening. A few critics praised the novel's artsy artistry, okay? But the majority were negative, calling the book morbid, unpleasant, unhealthy, sordid, and poison. And I'm just getting started. It took decades before critics fully grasped what Chopin had accomplished. So here is the public reception to The Awakening. Public Opinion writes in 1889, the name of a magazine. The critic says he was well satisfied with Edna's suicide because she deserved to die for her moral behavior. Goes on to say that the immorality in the book is awful. It calls into doubt, quote, the possibility of a woman of solid old Presbyterian Kentucky stock ever being at all like the heroine, and concluding that, quote, we are all well satisfied when she drowns herself. So Edna's from Kentucky in the book. Let's see. Books of the Day. In a column called Books in the Day, the Chicago Times-Herald writes in 1899, The Awakening, he praises The Awakening for being strong. The overall review is negative. He says, quote, it was not necessary for a writer of so great refinement and poetic grace. I don't know where I'm coming up with this attitude. To enter the overworked field of sex fiction. That was a genre. It was just called sex fiction. This is not a pleasant story, but the contrast between the heroine and the other character, who is utterly devoted to her husband and family, saves it from utter gloom. So for him, the heroine is Adele. Willa Cather labored it trite and sordid, which is bizarre because on the back of this edition, where's my other edition? Oh, where did I put it? Oh, Lordy. Okay. In my other edition of the book, the little one I showed you that has somehow disappeared from existence from the very face of the earth. Oh, here it is. I even highlighted it. It says that Willa Cather described the style of this book as exquisite, sensitive, and iridescent. Okay. Moving forward, this is why you get your research from many different places in that one source. Okay, like I said, newspapers said it was poison and unpleasant, too strong a drink for moral babes. A headline, a St. Louis woman who has turned fame into literature. Emily Toth, the biographer, says that she just went too far with this one. Her blatant sensuality was just too much for, Toth calls the male gatekeepers. So her next novel was canceled. So being canceled is nothing new. They didn't like, what else didn't they like? Extramarital affairs, the fact that females had sexual tendencies. They found it morbid, vulgar, disagreeable. Edna constantly rebuking gender roles and norms was just shocking and scandalous. Good literature at the time did not discuss women's emotions. Men ignored or unaware that women also had impulses, at least in public, in private, who knows. Edna admitting even to herself that she was sexually aroused it was shocking to Edna, let alone the readers. And that she engaged in an affair was just scandalous. Okay, so people were appalled. I'm just trying to find every adjective I could find. They were appalled. Here's a verb. They denounced her. They denounced Kate. Women were expected to accept their station. This was absolutely so, it just rocked the foundations of absolutely everything. And because Edna just blatantly refuses to continue, there's actually a pro-Leonce contingent. Readers sided with Leonce when Edna refuses to have sex with him. And when she moves out of the house, readers criticize her for abandoning her children. I kind of get that, but it seems like they're also removed all these Gilded Age folks from their kids. Maybe their kids never even noticed. I don't know. Critics felt that Kate Chopin was overstepping her rights to discuss Edna's thoughts and improprieties so objectively. And this objectively put a pin in that because if time permits, I want to talk to you about her writing style that she absorbed from French literature, which is aloof and is objective and which adds to the brilliant irony as our narrator is telling the story. They felt that Chopin should have punished Edna in some way. The writing is described as unhealthy, unwholesome, unpleasant, and a dangerous specimen of sex fiction. We hear this sort of thing from other books, like when Charlotte Perkins Gilman published The Yellow Wallpaper. But even in that book, there's a traditional resolution. Basically, she loses. So this cage of convention, AKA a doll's house, keep both Kate Chopin and Edna trying to live a life of freedom virtually impossible. Okay. Even some of the most radical women of the time still thought that sexual passion led to being immoral and was actually unhealthy. So despite incredible changes for women in the United States, Kate was censured for the choices she made with her Edna. Edna's passion was described by one reviewer as ugly, cruel, and loathsome. She was a monster. And Kate herself, and through Edna, by questioning the idea of woman as only wife and mother without passion and without her own mind, led to the demise of Kate's writing career. Okay. And just a little more, people were also offended by the adultery. They cheered her suicide. They wanted to keep women within the rules of society. And although men could have affairs and still be respected, the same was not given to women. Edna was allowed to have her own thoughts if she would only keep them to herself, and airing and acting on them was moral outrage. I could go on and on. Now, up to this point, Kate's editors tolerated these themes and the characters' actions because these characters, this region, these dialects were also almost seen as foreign, French, Creole. So they were tolerated because they weren't seen as wholly American. What can I tell you? Okay, this all defied tradition. And Kate also defied tradition because she actually helped her husband in their businesses. She took walks by herself through the streets of New Orleans. Kate smoked cigarettes. And the awakening represented this blatant disregard for everything about society. Basically, Edna thinks and acts as Kate. So in spite of this free climate that the women's movement wanted, the St. Louis Fine Arts Club removes Kate, because I'm on a first name basis with her, from their roles. Women's issues are still too new for the late 1800s, and the book had no impact. No impact. Kate never wrote another novel and gradually gave up writing, or because I get more than one source, Kate, discouraged by the criticism, and turned to writing no more novels and just short stories exclusively. Okay, so now I'm just going to summarize a bit. She wrote about 100 short stories or novels during her life, right? Readers liked how she used local dialects. Novels were not well received versus her short stories that were. And any rumor that the novel was originally banned has been disproved. So you're going to find that in places, but it's not the truth. So I'm just going to, I have to run. I have a hard stop. So I'm just going to take us up to 1904 when Kate passes to tell you the rest about her life. And hopefully you can join me in our members only discussion where we go further into the book, into the themes, into her writing style, et cetera, et cetera. And even I have a lot of fun facts to share. But anyway, in 1900, she does have two short stories published in Vogue. In 1902, some scholars have written that in 1902 was the year that rumors went around that it was being banned, but it wasn't taken off library shelves. In 1904, she buys a ticket for the St. Louis World's Fair, which is located not far from her home. It's a hot summer. And that Saturday, it was especially hot, August 20th. So when Kate Chopin returned home from the fair, she was exhausted. She told her son she had a pain in her head, but doctors think now that she had a cerebral hemorrhage. She lapsed into unconsciousness and died. She's buried in Calvary Cemetery in St. Louis, and people visit her and leave tokens of their affection. In 1905, her last published story appeared in Youth's Companion, and it's called Her First Party. And you can go into the Kate Chopin website and read exactly read the story. And they have like I don't know, a JPEG, whatever, so you can read how it looked originally when it was published. Her novels, I'm wrapping up here, her novels were mostly forgotten after her death. The books remained unnoticed for several years after the commotion, and some others were reprinted, but slowly people came to read her. It was the qualities for which she was condemned that actually brought her to attention decades later. And I found this quote from Fred Lewis Patty from 1950. This actually came from Wikipedia. I go everywhere. Okay. And he says that some of Chopin's work is equal to the best that has been produced in France and even America. He says she displayed what may be described as a native aptitude for narration, amounting almost to genius. So truly, it isn't until 1969 when a Norwegian historian writes a biography about Kate Chopin that brings her to the attention of a lot of scholars and academics. And then it is an article in the New York Times in 1972 that brings her to the attention of the general public. And from then, 1972, I hope I said that. And then her book, her story, The Awakening, is picked up by Avon Books, and you can start finding it in bookstores and drugstores, et cetera, and brings us to where we are today, where someone like myself is so moved by this author's writing and her storytelling that this is my third time reading it. So I'm going to say goodbye for now. Thank you so much. Please join me online or in person for an in-depth discussion with you at chapterendnotes.com. Just go to chapterendnotes.com, and I look forward to discussing more literature with you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.